Alright. Hi, my name is Selena Cuevas, and this video presentation is for the final project for Professor Colbert Dunbar's Sociology 3306 class. And for my presentation, I'll be talking about race and the educational achievement gap. So what is the educational achievement gap? The educational achievement gap refers to the differences in performance among different student groups that we see in education. These disparities can be observed by student performance on standardized tests, college enrollment rates, student dropout rates, and other areas of measurement. While the exact root of the achievement gap is unclear, it is influenced by family income and educational levels, race and ethnicity, and gender. These are external factors, and the practices used inside of schools play a role in the educational achievement gap as well. Alright, so the first article that we will be talking about today is called The Punishment Gap, School Suspension and Racial Disparities in Achievement, written by Edward W. Morris and Bree L. Perry. So Morris and Perry's article studies the impact that exclusionary punishment in schools, for example, suspension, has on the racial achievement gap. The inequalities in education lay the foundation for inequality in adulthood, including disparities in employment, incarceration, and health. So Morris and Perry conducted a study examining the impact of student suspension rates on student achievement and considers the role of race in school disciplinary actions. And when we speak of exclusionary punishment throughout this presentation, we're referring to the types of disciplinary actions taken by schools that isolate students from others and take those students away from learning environments. For example, in-school suspension and out-of-school suspension and expulsion. Right. So Morris and Perry cover a good amount of factors, and a couple of factors that take place outside of school are these. So to an extent, the inequalities that students face outside of school do have an impact on the educational gap. However, school punishment explains differences for educational achievement gaps, yet it had not been studied extensively, which is one of the reasons why Morris and Perry decided to conduct the study. So school punishment is a contributing factor to the achievement gap because school punishment is not applied equally across the board. School punishment varies by race. This means that the racial variation in punishment leads to racial variation in academic achievement. Exclusionary forms of school punishment take students away from learning environments, hindering academic growth. And exclusionary discipline is overused in schools, which creates challenges to reducing racial inequities in education. Current methods of punishment in schools kind of mirror the methods that are used in the criminal justice system, which only criminalizes student behavior. For example, a lot of schools now have uniformed police officers that are on campus. Students are subjected to random searches, and schools have enacted zero-tolerance policies. So more specifically, these zero-tolerance policies were modeled after the three strikes laws of the 1980s. Zero-tolerance policies require automatic suspension or expulsion for students who have committed certain infractions. However, Black students are punished at higher rates than white students are and may even be subjected to harsher punishments, including court action and police involvement. Black students are 3 times more likely to be punished and suspended than white students are. So Morris and Perry kind of go over the effects of the exclusionary discipline measures as well. And they found that suspension does not have any behavioral or academic benefits for students. Suspension could even make matters worse and enhance any anger or resentment students may feel. So these emotions and suspension kind of weaken the relationship between a student and their school, which only increases the chances of students misbehaving and repeating the cycle. School suspension has been linked to low academic performance and high dropout rates. Since students are disciplined while not coming to school, they're not in that learning environment, therefore they're not learning what they need to be on par with the rest of their classmates. And when we think of these effects and consider which students receive exclusionary punishments the most, we can deduce that Black students are at a high risk of falling behind in school since they are disproportionately suspended from school. So these are the questions that Morris and Perry's research focused on, and their study aimed to answer these 3 questions. The first being, are racial and ethnic minorities at disproportionate risk for school suspension? The second, are racial ethnic background and school suspension associated with academic achievement in reading and math, controlling for other individual characteristics, and all school level heterogeneity? meaning that the study methods kind of took into account different factors that could be associated with educational achievement gaps. And the last question, do racial differences in the likelihood of suspension explain the significant proportion of the racial achievement gap? So Morris and Perry's findings found that Black students are 7.57 times more likely to be suspended than white students are. Latinos are over twice as likely than white students are to be suspended. And when socioeconomic status, gender, special education services are taken into consideration, Black students are still 3 times more likely to be suspended than white students in the same school, meaning that Black and Latino students, since Black and Latino students are suspended at higher rates than than classmates of different ethnic groups, Black students and Latinos are more likely to fall behind, and sometimes can even be school years behind their other peers. So how does this research affect the educational achievement gap? As Morris and Perry's research found, Black and Latino students can be up to 7 times more likely to be suspended from school as a disciplinary method. And given what we know about the impact that exclusionary discipline has on academic growth, we can understand how these types of disciplinary measures can widen the educational achievement gap. Black and Latino students are more likely to be removed from learning environments as a disciplinary measure, which has long-lasting effects and can put students on a trajectory of poor performance. The second article we will be discussing is titled The Achievement Gap and the Discipline Gap, Two Sides of the Same Coin by Anne Gregory et al. So this article draws upon various studies that examine the racial and ethnic patterns in school discipline and explains how these patterns can contribute to the educational achievement gap. However, this article goes more in depth about the different factors that can contribute to student misconduct, including school and teacher contributions. So these are some of the key takeaways. The first being that disciplinary actions in schools are meant to maintain order and ensure safety by removing students who break these rules and use those students in the disciplinary actions as an example for all other students. The issue here is that educators and administrators tend to turn to exclusionary measures as their main form of discipline. In the process, Black, Latino, and Native American students are subject to disproportionate amounts of discipline. In continuation, male students of any race or ethnicity are likely to receive disciplinary actions, but Black male students are the most targeted group. Black male students are about 16 times more likely to be suspended than white female students. Moreover, disciplinary actions in the form of suspension and expulsion cause students to lose instructional time. Since these students are not being academically engaged, their academic performance is poor, and the suspended students can be up to 5 grade levels behind their peers if they are suspended repeatedly. The more that these students are targeted for expulsionary discipline, the more instructional time that they're missing, which means that they are learning less than their peers are. Alright, so now we're going to go over the impact of socioeconomic status and neighborhood characteristics on disciplinary actions. So low achievement students from low income backgrounds are at a greater risk of misbehaving and being suspended from school. Students living in low income neighborhoods can be exposed to a variety of issues, such as violence and substance abuse, which can impact their mental health and influence their behavior in the classroom. This behavior can then be interpreted by teachers as a student misbehaving or acting out, which is met with disciplinary action. Moreover, students that attend schools with a predominant low-income student body or students from low-income families are more likely to be subjected to disproportionate levels of disciplinary action for the same reasons. Right. So now we're going to talk about differential selection and how it applies in schools. So when it is applied to an educational setting, differential selection explains why Black, Latino, and Native American students are more likely to be differentially selected to receive disciplinary actions. This theory is most common in a criminal justice setting, in which ethnic minority youth have higher incarceration rates than white youth due to police surveillance, racial profiling, and biased sentencing. Additionally, teacher expectations of student behavior can determine whether ethnic minority students are selected for disciplinary actions or not. Teachers can rely on stereotypes and media portrayals of ethnic minority youth to interpret their language and physical expressions, which means that the teachers go into the classroom having these preconceived biases of how students of certain ethnic or racial groups may behave, and therefore kind of like the behavior that any student might exhibit that kind of align with those preconceived notions just jumps out at the instructor, and it's kind of easier for the teacher to respond to that with discipline. All right, so here are my conclusions. And these conclusions, I came to these conclusions after kind of comparing the findings that each article had and the information that each one presented, and this is what I guess kind of like solutions to offer, conclusions that I came to after reading them. The first being that exclusionary discipline does more harm to students than it does good. Since suspension and expulsion is linked to poor academic achievement, these measures should be treated as last resort disciplinary options if used at all. Issues on race and culture must be taken into consideration when addressing achievement and discipline gaps. And again, this kind of ties back to teachers coming into the classroom with preconceived notions and kind of applying the differential selection theory whenever they are disciplining students. Additionally, school teachers and administrators must be fully aware of how their biases can influence disciplinary action and student achievement. And lastly, schools must find a way to maintain a positive bond with students even when disciplinary actions are being taken. This bond is what is threatened whenever students are suspended or expelled from schools, and this is kind of what this leads to student disengagement. This leads to students being disinterested in what the school has to have, and it kind of creates an antagonistic relationship between the school and the student. And this is a bond that must be kept positive and has to be reinforced even when a student is being disciplined. And these are my references. Thank you so much for watching my presentation. I hope you had some good takeaways from it. Bye-bye.